Well, I think we can begin, and other people can join us as we proceed. So, my name is Nick Blomley. I'm professor of geography at Simon Fraser University, and I'm the moderator for this panel today on Watermelon Snow: Science, Art, and a Lone Polar Bear, written by Lynne Quarmby. I want to begin by acknowledging that Simon Fraser University, which is hosting this event, acknowledges the unceded traditional Coast Salish lands, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. I would invite you to consider the relationships that you have to the land upon which you're presently sitting. I'd like to welcome you to our gathering to talk about Lynne Quarmby's wonderful book, Watermelon Snow. I'm going to introduce Lynne shortly, and after a short conversation between her and I, we're going to meet our lovely panelists who are waiting in the wings, and they're going to talk around for about 20 minutes on Lynne's book, and then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, for your questions and comments and thoughts. If I can just have the next slide, please, just so we make sure we're, that's our agenda, I'm sorry. So there we are. I'm ahead of myself, but if we can now move on to the community agreement slide. So this session is being recorded and will be posted on the CERi website, sfu.ca/CERi, CERi, for those who can't attend live. This is a webinar in which you can see the speakers, but unfortunately we can't see you, nor can you see other audience members. Even and especially in this context, we're gathering here in a spirit of mutual support and respect for each other, acknowledging the diverse learning journeys we're all on. So we're listening to learn rather than to react. We're here just for 90 minutes today, and there's so much more we can talk about. So we accept and expect non-closure. We invite you to use the chat box, which you should see on your screen, to introduce yourselves, sharing your name and your pronouns and what brings you to this space today. And when you post questions in the Q&A feature or the chat, they're going to be tracked throughout the presentation. And if possible, we'll pose those to the presenters, as I said, about halfway through, but due to limited time, we might not be able to get to everyone. So without further ado, maybe we could go back to the screen, take the slide down, and I can invite Lynne maybe to join me on screen. So Lynne can turn her, there we are, her camera and her audio on. Lynne, it's lovely to see you. Lynne, I think you're joining us from further afield, but it's so wonderful you're there, and the sun is shining in your through your window. So Lynne Quarmby is Professor of Molecular Biology and Biochemistry at Simon Fraser University. As a cell biologist, Lynne studied the molecular machinery of motility and sensation. And in 2016, her work pivoted to an ecological exploration of the climate-threatened microbiome living on the surface of alpine summer snow. And amongst many things, she's the author of Watermelon Snow. Lynne, tell us just a little something about what motivated you to write this book, to write Watermelon Snow. And here it is. If you haven't got a copy, you should get one now. Beg, borrow, and steal.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks very much. Before I answer your question, I want to thank Nick very much for making this event happen, conceiving it and just pulling it together. I'm really very honored, and thank you for that. I'm also really honored at the panel that has been brought together to participate today. It's just an amazing group of people that I just feel really honored to have them here, having read the book, and people who are not one whit naive about what's going on, people who are really well tuned in and yet live life with a really positive attitude. And so I hope that's one of the big take homes today, is we don't need any false hope. We can look this reality head on and still live lives filled with joy. So, and I'm hoping we'll get some cameos from puppies today. We have a few puppies in the background. So, okay. So to the book, Nick was asking me what my motivation was and why I wrote it. The book followed on the heels of several years of climate activism. Most extreme of that, I guess, would be running as a candidate in the federal election in 2015. So all of these things, as a politician and as an activist, a frontline activist, I felt not really heard. I kept getting feedback that people didn't understand why I was sacrificing my research program, my health, my whatever, why I was so deeply engaged and passionate. It wasn't, they understood intellectually, but the message wasn't getting through. And so I had this feeling, I don't like interviews and I don't like live videos because I never say the right thing. And so to write a book was an opportunity to sit down and really collect my thoughts and make sure that I was saying what I really meant to say. And so that was really what got me started. I felt, of course, that if only people could understand what I'm trying to say, we would all get on the same boat and pull together. And so that, of course, was driving it. And also recognizing that in the process of writing, as we all in science, we learn really well that when we sit down to write our grant proposal, that's when we really understand. We have to get in and start writing before we know what it is we want to do. And so I approached the book with that too. I expected the process to teach me something. And it did. So I knew that I had these threads I wanted to weave together. Sorry, I'm keeping one eye on the time. I wanted to weave together an autobiographical thread that I felt was, I was really, again, I had to, it took many, many drafts to fill out that thread. I really just wanted to tell some stories about the activism and the campaign. But as I got deeper into the book, I realized that there was stuff from my childhood that informed my worldview, stuff from my experience as a woman in science. So the autobiographical thread grew. I knew that I really, this was the original concept for the book, was to really write about molecules and cells and this sense of our place in the grand scheme of things on Earth. Where do we fit all the way from the origin of life to where we are today with this richness of life around us, and to really understand that and the connection of how cells use energy and how humans use energy and the continuum of that. So that was stuff I wanted to communicate. And of course, I wanted to communicate climate science, but I had already learned that the science itself was never motivating. It wasn't just knowing this stuff, but you had to help people make sense of it. What does this actually mean? And so I thought I wanted that thread in the book. And as I worked it, and I had so much fun with the structure and trying to get resonances between the different threads and have these, it was just so much fun doing all of that. But it wasn't until quite late in the process that I realized that one of the themes of the book, and it became to me the most central theme, the most important, the thing that I learned from writing the book that became the purpose of the book, was appreciating that in failing to grieve what we're losing and what we've already lost, I was in a kind of denial. So in my panic and fear-driven activism, I was denying that we could make more change than we actually can. And so I recognized that for my health and for my effectiveness, I needed to recognize that grief. And I can't say I've really dealt with it, but I think it's, I'm going to read a bit from the book, but this doesn't count. This is, I want to read the short epigraph. As I was writing the book, I put different poems at the front, and those poems to me was what the book was about at that time, and that changed several times. But the last round of the book and what stayed is a very short poem by Mary Oliver called The Uses of Sorrow. Someone I once loved gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. And I really felt that that's what writing this book was for me. It was that gift of appreciating that this darkness, that opening to it and accepting it, this grief was the gift that enriched my life, helped me live more deeply, and paradoxically opened me to being able to experience joy again, which I hadn't for quite a while. Yeah. So that's the answer to that for this morning. There's of course, different ways it could be answered, but
there are, and it's such a lovely book. I mean, I read it in like a day. It's and there are so many layers to it. Choosing an excerpt would be hard, but maybe you could just give us a short excerpt, a hint.
I will.
Thank you.
I did plan ahead for this. And because the book is so issue driven, and the backbone of the book is really about this expedition to the Arctic. And I thought that's one thing that we might not even talk about today. And yet it's more, it's a bulk of the book is the stories of the Arctic. And of course, the themes of grief and climate change are all woven into that expedition. But I thought I would read just a short excerpt from Life on the Ship.
Please.
After the 10-minute talks in the salon, some of us are gathered around the bar when Brett pokes his head in and encourages us to come out on deck. Down in her cabin, listening through the hull of the ship, Natalie had heard the sound of seals singing. Rachel quickly connected her submerged hydrophone to a speaker she brought along for sharing sonic experiences. It's such a gift to be together on deck, experiencing the seal song in real time. The song begins with a rapid rise in pitch, followed by a slower, cascading drop, and then suddenly rises again and slowly cascades to lower tones, until there's another sudden rise, which cascades again, this time for longer, going lower. Then there is silence, until unexpectedly the song starts again. I exclaim repeatedly in wonder as we are serenaded by Erignathus barbatus, the bearded seal. Like some human-made music, the song, though mournful to my ear, fills me with joy. We grin at one another and laugh every time we are surprised by the initiation of a new round of the song. I stand on the deck of the Antigua with this amazing group of people, surrounded by sea ice, mountains, and 2 glaciers flowing into the sea. On the foredeck, Eric has turned his lens on another distant polar bear. The one I had watched walk across the fast ice is now fast asleep. It's a little past midnight and light as day.
Thank you so much. We have just a couple of minutes before we go to the panel, but I wanted to ask, what did the seal sing to you? I mean, by which I mean there are so many references in the book to the natural worlds, to algae and to bearded seals and to bears and so on. But what did that seal say to you?
What an interesting question. I guess it was, well, first of all, it was clearly music. And it was, I knew I was eavesdropping. He wasn't really speaking to me. He was calling out, presumably, to another of his own species or her own species. I don't know enough about seals to know what that communication was about. But when I hear it, I know that to me, it sounds like that seal is saying, oh, the ice is melting. But of course, it's probably saying, hey, honey, I'm over here. Yeah. But so it's easy for us to lay things on. It did sound like...
Yeah. There was also joy. You talked of this joyful encounter, and yes. That seems important too, does it not?
Absolutely. All of these experiences were just, well, it was awe and joy and just this gratitude to have this experience in real time, in situ. We're there, and the seal is there, and it was just gratitude for the experience. And yeah, it was very joyful to hear it, even though the sound sounded sad.
Well, that's what's one of the many wonderful features of the book to me is this is what we might call affect. I mean, there's anger and there's sadness and there's grief, but there's also joy and celebration. And in an account that is in many ways about something that's very not joyful, we're talking about the climate crisis. To bring joy into the room to me seemed a powerful move, but an important one maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is important, because otherwise what's it all for, right? It's
Well, thank you very much. Let's pick up that thread, but maybe if I can now invite our panelists to come in from the wings and enter the theatre, and turn on your cameras at least. Maybe you leave your mics off for now. Let me introduce our wonderful panel. We were joking when we set this up, but it sounded like the beginning of a joke. A climate scientist and a poet and a geographer into the bar, but we sort of have that here. We have this wonderfully eclectic group of people whose point of connection perhaps is only Lynne. Lynne is the hub around which this lovely panel circulates. So Catherine Harrison is Professor of Political Science at the University of British Columbia, and Professor Harrison studies environmental, climate and energy policy, federalism and comparative public policy, a frequent media commentator and policy advisor. Catherine is the author of the book Passing the Buck, Federalism and Canadian Environmental Policy, and co-author of Risk, Science and Politics. Stephen Collis is Professor of English at Simon Fraser University. Professor Collis's many books of poetry include The Commons, On the Material, Decomp, Once in Blocadia, and I think most recently, just fresh from the press, hot off the press, a history of the theories of rain. And he doesn't say it in his bio, but he has a history of civil disobedience, which connects him to Lynne, that maybe may come up with. Kirsten Ziegfeld, Distinguished Professor of Climate Science at SFU, a colleague of mine in geography, so wonderful to have you here. Wonderful to have you all here. Professor Ziegfeld's primary research interests are in the long-term effects of human activities on climate, and she's recognized for her research on the irreversibility of human-induced climate change and carbon budgets consistent with climate targets, and is a member of the IPCC. Grace Nozick, Allard School of Law, as we should now call it, at UBC, is a 2018 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Scholar, and Grace is interested in how law can be used to protect climate change science, particularly in an environment of doubt created by companies focused on protecting profit. A former Fulbright fellow, she's currently pursuing a PhD in law at UBC. Martha Syatt is Professor of Biology at Stanford, a distinguished cell biologist whose research explores the molecular circuitry modulating muscle. I didn't know that was a thing. Immune and neural cells. And Professor Syatt's discoveries include the elucidation of the molecular mechanism of immunosuppression. And Martha is recognized for her excellence in both research and teaching. In addition to her work at Stanford, Martha has taught cell biology workshops in Ghana. And last but not least, Johal is director of SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement and co-director of SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative, CERi, who are also very kindly hosting this webinar. He's the author of Ecological Metapolitics, Badiou and the Anthropocene, and co-author with Matt Hearn and Joe Sacco in The Phenomenal Global Warming and the Sweetness of Life, A Tar Sands Tale. So thank you all for being here. It's wonderful for you. We're so happy you could join us for this conversation. Maybe we can just kick off, and I'll just throw this out to whoever wants to take it, just for a couple of very quick sentences or two. Why should people read Lynne's book? Anyone want to have a go at that? Oh, Martha, turn your mic audio on, please.
Got it. I'll kick us off. There are so many reasons, but the one that I'll pick to talk about, I'm here as a scientist, and I would say you have to read this book if you think science is boring. Because there are very few books that really get across what it's like to be a scientist. Lynne is such a great storyteller. There's all kinds of science, from cell biology to microbiology to climate science, woven expertly through the book. It's never overwhelming. It's always entertaining. And she just really portrays the sort of passion and excitement that comes along with actually being a practicing scientist.
Wonderful, thank you. Stephen, did you have your hand up? Yes, maybe you can turn on your... Yep.
Sure, and I'll balance that comment on the wonderful science of the book with its poetry. And that's what I would draw attention to. And so I'm just going to read like the briefest little, it's a couple sentences, just to give a sense of how good this writing is. The air is still and water calm and clear. An adjacent ice flow plunges several meters below the surface in diminishing turquoise contours. Above the water, the ice age glows lapis blue, reflecting like a glaze on the turquoise below. Nearby, a pair of eiders swim along an ice edge. Above the ice, horizontal clouds line up in a dozen soft, thin rows, subtle swaths of gray, pink, and dusty purple, the color of a fresh picked plum before you polish it for eating. My eyes fill with tears.
Beautiful.
Good job, Lynne.
So Lynne, if this biology gig doesn't work out, it sounds like you've got a job in English. So that's moving between those two domains. Wonderful. I'm going to keep the conversation rolling. People can pick up on that thread as we go along, but maybe I can turn to Stephen and to Grace with a question. So in Watermelon Snow, we have these artists on this boat, including some scientists, Lynne in particular, and they're exploring themes of climate change, colonialism, and grief. And in the book, Lynne shares a story of when she was really jolted to her activism, to a deeper political understanding of climate change by a work of art. So we know art is powerful. Stephen and Grace, you're both activists, you're both artists. In what ways does your art support your activism, or does it? Grace, do you want to pick up that thread?
Sure. And I'll also just hop in and say why I would recommend Lynne's book. Just to keep going on that train. I'm reading a lot about pandemic burnout. And one of the things that it's really tied to is boredom, this sense of kind of everything being the same and this loss of wonder or awe. And I felt so much awe in reading Lynne's book, and it returned me to that excitement of kind of being in high school and learning these wild things about how the world is made, and not really getting to experience that for a long time. And so, it's funny, here I am trying to read these books at night kind of to wind down. And then I find myself like scrawling notes, like getting a notebook out. So there's that. And then, yes, I think art and climate change are fundamentally connected. So as I mentioned very briefly, I study how the fossil fuel industry undermines climate narratives, how they've been doing so for 40 years. And they are the best climate storytellers out there right now, the fossil fuel industry. And people don't think about it that often, but the people who have done the most psychological research in the world is private industry. And they've done it to understand what makes us tick, how to get us to buy things, how to shape our ideas. And they play the long game. How do we shape your entire view of this world so that you will continue to buy our products in the future? And so thinking and knowing, and my thesis is just every single way that they have shut down the public's ability to participate in the climate policy debate. So that's been really, really interesting. And so for me, climate is this battle of stories. We need to take back the stories. And it's not just that climate change isn't happening or it's not human caused. There's now doomism. We have no hope. It'll destroy the economy. And particularly the hope one kills me, because I think it's horrific, immoral to make a generation of children feel like they don't have a future on the planet. And so for the last many years, I've been using art and activism to directly fight the narratives that I encounter. And what's really fun is that, the fossil fuel industry has billions and billions and billions of dollars and thousands of employees and communications, but our stories are more compelling in the end. We have a better story of how we take care of each other and where the world is going. And so we don't need the same amount of money or manpower. So yeah, I'm coming for the fossil fuel industry.
Nice. We're going to come back to the fossil fuel industry. Have time. Stephen, do you want to pick up this thread on art?
I'll be really brief because that was just lovely. Thanks, Grace, and inspiring and everything we probably want to hear right now. So I'm often asked about this or talk about this or think about this. And what I'd always say is, yes, on the one hand, art has everything to do with social change. That's why we make art, I think. It's an engagement with the way the world is and the way it could be. But it's never enough, obviously. And I think we need to understand when we think of our art making in the context of social change, we need to think of how our art making collaborates with science or collaborates with the law or collaborates with politics and collaborates with social movements and direct action, all these things. No one thing is more significant than the other. And so they're coming together and converging. That's really significant. And the other thing I'd say is just that social change is a slow process. And we don't have that luxury right now. And that's where the tension really is. So we need to keep making art, and that art will and is changing things. New ideas are introduced, new ways of being are understood in the world, but that is a slower process than the climatological process that's happening in a lot of ways. And so hurry up, please, it's time.
Thank you. So the subtext for the book is Science, Art, and Alone Polar Bears. So we touched on art. So let's pivot to talk about science. And I don't want to separate those two, but maybe Martha and Kirsten, if we could come to you, and let's think about science and public engagement and the challenges maybe between the two. So Lynne writes, quote, "To succeed in science requires one's full attention. It's what you think about in the shower. It's a full-time job. You're both highly respected scientists at the top of your field. So what's your experience with the tension between maintaining your own research programs, getting the funding, getting the students and so on, and on the other hand, engaging with the public as an advocate or an activist, depending on how you position yourself? Martha, do you want to pick up that thread?
I guess for me, the tension is more the kind of communication that I've done most with the public is through teaching. You mentioned I've taught in Ghana. Of course, I teach undergraduates at Stanford, a variety of different teaching. But it's sort of both a blessing and a curse. So one of the best things about being an academic scientist is that you really get to decide on the breadth of activities that you'd like to be doing. Lynne is absolutely correct that the sort of backbone of everything is you've got to have money to keep that research program going. And to do that, you have to have, in our world of cell biology, you have to have a group of scientists in the lab that you're mentoring. And I still see that as sort of my fundamental core mission. But at the same time, you do have the opportunity to explore other ways of communicating with the world. And those are good things. And one of the also really satisfying things I've done as a scientist is I'm in the US. So through a professional organization, American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, going every year to talk to legislators and explaining to them how critical it is to maintain the world of basic science. Mm-hmm. So it's a tension, but also your opportunities to talk with non-scientists also kind of make you appreciate that core love that you have for what you're doing.
Right. Thank you. Kirsten, do you want to pick up this thread? Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks, Nick. So first, I'd also like to say why I deeply love Lynne's book. So to me, what really stood out is the level of personal introspection that it offers. I think it's very rare in terms of books written by scientists to offer this level of sincerity about struggles and about emotions that we face in confronting this climate crisis. So I thought this was quite unique and moved me very much. So in terms of what we're discussing right now, I'd like to take this in a slightly different direction, which is perhaps more so what is the role of climate scientists and this, and how can we be most effective? I would say sort of that's the tension that I live with most of the time. So when I made a decision to switch to climate science after a master's degree in theoretical physics, what really drove me is the wish to make a difference. So I really enjoyed this process of scientific discovery, but I realized it's not really connected to what I care about. And I realized that with the skills that I bring as a physicist, I actually could make a useful contribution to climate science. So this is what led my transition. And I think sort of in doing this, the sort of perhaps naive presumption here is that if we produce the evidence and then communicate it properly, that this will lead the world into action. So this is what I believed when I started my PhD. If we produce the knowledge and we find the means to communicate those effectively, then we will be acting. And so I started my PhD in the late 90s. And so this was actually a hopeful time in Germany where the red-green government really was pushing on climate action. But so soon I came to realize that so this is not how the world works. So we had these corporations at work sowing uncertainty and pushing climate denial. So I quickly realized that even if we put the science out there, this is not enough to actually get people into to act. And I would say it's been a continuous struggle what this means for me, but I would say that after some brief or periodic excursion into activism and advocacy, for me, I concluded that still the most effective way is to be perceived as an objective climate scientist and communicator, and that as a climate scientist who's not partisan, I reach parts of the audience that I would not otherwise reach. So it's a broad topic to explore, but I'll leave it here. Thanks.
It's a very important one. And people negotiate it in their own ways, of course, and that makes sense. But we only have maybe about 7 or 8 minutes before we open up more generally. But I want to come back to the fossil fuel industry, who've been in the room a little bit, and so maybe maybe Am can jump in on this as well, and Catherine. Certainly, and Grace, if we have time, but the role of fossil fuel corporations, the power they have in manufacturing consent, as Grace put it, and Lynne discusses in the book, is something she acknowledges. But the way in which politicians respond to this is something that she seems to be perplexed by or baffled by. Why ultimately all our politicians, except maybe the Greens, which is another conversation, maybe talk the good talk, but then support Trans Mountain pipelines and LNG and so on once elected. And she writes, quote, "What genuinely perplexes me is how so many politicians who seem like good people can be twisted into alignment with this nasty industry. It keeps me up at night." Am or Catherine, did you want to pick up that and address that bafflement or respond to it? Catherine, maybe, do you want to pick that up? Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to. The fossil fuel industry has a lot to answer for. One of the things is climate change denial, but really 80% or more of Canadians accept that climate change is happening. Virtually all of our political leaders, say that climate change is being caused by human activity. So I think that has been part of the problem, but a bigger part of the problem is money. The fossil fuel industry directly and very successfully has lobbied against effective climate policies for decades. And it's also, and this is a tough thing to say because no one wants to hear it, but I think it's also voters. One of the truisms in political science is that the people who are going to lose from a public policy fight back harder than the people who are going to win. And so the communities that are concerned about losing their jobs because they're dependent on the oil industry are paying close attention. They are well organized. And the 37 million Canadians, 80% of whom believe that climate change is real and support action, but they aren't really paying attention to the same degree. And I think as a result, for a very long time, we've had politicians in Canada who talk a good line. They promise deep reductions and they offer feel-good policies like, money for home renovations and a few $1,000s if you buy an e-vehicle. And they give this sense that something is happening, but they're not the policies that we need to drive down emissions. I think that's changing. I think that activist campaigns to discredit the fossil fuel industry, I think Indigenous communities' opposition to pipelines, I think the youth climate movement has recast this as a moral battle. And honestly, the accumulation of evidence of the crisis has created a moment for leadership and at least has discredited really bogus climate platforms. I think that hurt the Conservatives in the last federal election. We'll see what happens if there's an election this year. So it's a bunch of things all at once. I think the fossil fuel industry is a big part of it, but it's more than that.
Right. Thank you.
To build on what Catherine said, we're indeed in a petroculture, and when you're in a petroculture, the stakes of politics play out in particular ways, weighed down by the economic forces of big industry and big players. And I think what's at stake in the book for me and the parts that I found interesting about it's the importance of those personal narratives and constructing a zone of resistance that spoke in a way of Lynne's personal story of a political and moral calling that's drawn from scientific rigor. So the evidentiary basis is still there, but then the question of, well, how do we do it? How do we deal with the question of the other and opposing political viewpoints and to construct something at a scale that functions at hegemony? And when I read the book, I did think about ecological grief and ecological mourning. When I was doing my own dissertation, I read the work of somebody named Ashley Consolo Willix, who's at Memorial University. So she's done a number of films and writing about this through Derrida's work. And as I finished the book, I thought back to some of her theoretical work. And if ecological melancholy is a thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be this thing that keeps us down, and that it's something that we're all going through. So it's actually a collective suffering we're going through, and can we turn this into something from the singular to the collective? And in the storytelling, we can actually start to think together in it. And so the personal narratives are important. It moves it out of the realm of environmental ethics of whether I should recycle or not. But those stories are a means by which we can possibly mobilize. And also the idea that the place of the contemplative, regardless regarding the ecological emergency. It's a place of repair and reorganization. And if we are going to be taking on big forces in the realms of activism, which rely on sweat equity, we are going to fall down. We're going to get tired. We're going to be frustrated. But how do we put this into the equation on the front end, that stories are a means of that sustenance, that we can think beyond those closures when they are large stakes, existential, all of those kinds of things.
Thank you so much. There are so many threads here, balls in the air. So let's throw some more balls in the air, and we're going to invite some questions from the audience for 20 minutes or so. And anyone can respond. Lynne, you're also allowed to respond as you see fit. So if you have questions, please post them on the chat or in the Q&A. I'm just so there's a question from Anne-Marie Pierce, which I think is for you, Lynne. And Anne-Marie says, I haven't yet had the chance to dissect this important book yet, but before I do, I wondered if you could speak on how Inuit science and climate observations have influenced your work, if they have at all. Is that something? I mean, you talked about spending time in the Arctic, and of course, that experience being very important. Is that something you can respond to?
I can always respond. I'm not sure how satisfying my response will be, so I'll do it quickly and maybe open it up. I would say that I definitely was influenced in the sense that I have listened and read Inuit speakers and authors and heard some of their stories. And in particular, Shilawat Kolche, I think is how you say her name. I've heard her speak and read A Right to Be Cold. And so that's definitely part of my consciousness. It's not explicitly in the book. And part of this really ties into what Anne was just saying, that I felt very strongly that it was important to tell my story and not to try to tell someone else's story. And so this was very tied to Western science, because that's the world I live in. It was my experience, and it was my experience of the Arctic. And I think that it's not to put one above the other. It's to say that we need them all. We need all these stories all coming together like tributaries to a river. And so highly respect and value that work, but it's not mine.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to pick that up, or I have another question which takes us back to storytelling, but just an observation, Lynne. So you talk about colonialism, and one of the points you make, which struck me, was somebody whose family has spent a long time as settlers in British Columbia, coming to terms with a recognition that yes, I am a settler and I'm on stolen, unceded land. But your point also that reconciliation work for you is about preserving and protecting the nature, the ecological systems upon which we all depend, which to me was a powerful point. But let's come back to storytelling, because I think that's a really important thread. I mean, narrative is we forget about it. We think of it as some sort of something that happens outside, but of course we're all constantly narrativizing ourselves, narrativizing our worlds, or having them narrated for us, as was mentioned earlier on. So here's a question or a comment. It seems that climate change is almost a taboo in mainstream storytelling. Beside documentaries, there are very few fictional shows, movies, songs that talk about climate change, especially the emotional and psychological dimensions of the crisis. How do we break this taboo with our cultural power brokers? How can we build connections between climate science and cultural producers? So we recognize the power of storytelling, and some of us want to tell those stories, and Lynne, you have. How do we get those stories out there? Who wants to pick that one up? Grace, is that you? Yes.
I'd be happy to start. So I'm not sure if it was mentioned in my bio, but I'm a founder of something called the Climate Hub at UBC. And it's a student-led, university-supported hybrid group. So it's unique because students decide the direction, but we actually have 2 full-time staff and student staff, and we're supported by the UBC administration. And so it's really this gorgeous way of creating the future that youth want to see in the present and modeling it. And our pillars are kind of justice, systems change rather than individual action, hope, agency, joyful community, and storytelling. And so we actually offer a program across high schools for free in Vancouver that weaves together all of those things, but it's really about learning how to tell your climate story. And kind of emphasizing that storytelling can actually be your place into the climate movement, because everyone can tell a story and everyone is their most important voucher to their community. And so it's so wonderful to host these ambassador workshops and say, you, not only are you important to the movement, you're critical to the movement. We can't do this without you. Because for so long, it's been white, middle class, folks, scientists who have been, the face of the climate movement. And so opening it up and saying everyone is important and you can speak to it even if you don't know the science. How does it make you feel? And who do we hold accountable? And the other thing that I love about it is that it makes visible the narrative pollution that we're living in. I really, this is going to be the work of my lifetime, but showing how it's like a video game map. We don't even know how the fossil fuel industry has shaped our imagination. Most people don't even know. And universities, without meaning to, have been so complicit in taking up their talking points, as have so many other institutions. And again, most of this is not from malignant desire, but because they don't even know that they're interfacing with corporate narratives. So my study is actually on freedom of speech and democracy. And what does it mean if you don't even know that you're taking in corporate speech? And Naomi Oreskes did this incredible study on manufactured uncertainty that showed that the electric agency, before the fossil fuel industry, went directly to professors and textbooks and ran the most successful propaganda campaign up to that point in the US, and thinks that maybe the University of Chicago and other universities focused on neoliberalism and markets dates back to this corporate campaign. That's how deep we're talking may shape the ideology, how we move through the world. And so, showing that and saying they're the ones who have really held up individual action, making us think that our power is as consumers rather than as community members, as citizens, as frontline folks. And so there's so much space in that to show that civic engagement and supporting the front line are the actual actions, and kind of flipping this all on its head. And storytelling can happen like this. It's such a moment. We see how cultures change their stories, and we can do it remarkably quickly. Social movements do take time, but it's amazing to look at 20 years ago, what we thought was acceptable around race, gender, homophobia in the media, and now the sea change. So I have a lot of hope in story.
Mm-hmm. So, are scientists storytellers?
I'll let the scientists answer.
Obviously, they can write wonderful stories, but is science...
Everything is a story. Yes. Every time you write a paper about your work or give a seminar or teach undergrad, everything's a story. That's how human beings, I think, really are able to, incorporate information. You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
But does it change? Sorry, Stephen, go on.
Well, I was just going to add that you could argue that scientists are the main storytellers of the climate change story at this point, as they have been for a while. Going back to the question of why are there not more mainstream stories. There are novels increasingly, but there was a book by Amitav Ghosh just a couple of years ago called The Great Derangement about why he's saying, why aren't there climate change novels? Well, there are, especially if you move over into the sci-fi realm of things, there's lots. But in mainstream fiction, quote, literary fiction, there's still reasonably few, growing, but few. And film, I guess you could say the same thing. So I'm not sure, there's a lag for whatever reason, those different genres, it's difficult to take up maybe, but also scientists have actually been doing the job in a lot of ways, or public figures like why can't I think of her name? The young Swedish woman. Greta. Blank. So I think those people have been telling the stories. A lot of cultural work to do.
There's a lot of cultural work to do, and moving between science and art and so on. It's these crossing these silos. We have maybe 3 or 2 minutes before we move to some reflections from you guys. But here's a quick question for Lynne, which I'm sure others who haven't read the book might be puzzled by. How did you come up with the title of the book, Watermelon Snow, Lynne? Could you tell us what watermelon snow is in 2 minutes, and then we'll
yes. In the springtime, when the snow begins to melt and there's liquid water on the surface, algae bloom there, just like they do out in the ocean when the conditions are right. So it's unicellular algae. They divide and grow and divide and grow. And these particular ones are red. And the red is to enable them basically to do photosynthesis at low temperatures. And because of this red color, the snow can look like watermelon flesh. So the name of this phenomenon has been watermelon snow. The nickname of it has been watermelon snow for a long time before we knew what it was. And seeking out watermelon snow in the Arctic was my justification for being on the voyage that is the backbone of the book.
And you mentioned that they're rather beautiful.
They are beautiful. You can go to the CERi website to see some microscopic images of them.
And get the book, and you can see even more images. There they are.
Thank you, Stephen.
They are absolutely gorgeous. There are some questions here that people have posted, which I don't have time to immediately address, but maybe I can fold some of these into our a sort of a wrap-up question. So the question that I was planning to pose was for everyone, if they could just share very quickly in 2 minutes your vision of a post-carbon future. This is the question Lynne wanted you to answer. What do you look forward in our world to be? So that's a positive, a question. But there are also questions about where do we go now? How do we act? Where do we take this forward? So can we maybe just invite the panel to respond to that? Catherine, do you want to kick off with that, if that's okay with you?
We go forward together.
Yeah.
I think we're not going to solve this problem as individuals recycling and cycling and eating vegetarian diets. Those are all really important things, but we need public policy to put in place rules that simply say certain activities are not allowed, and incentives for people to change their behavior. And if we want to have those policies, we need to act together, marches, letters, and voting. We will end up with the governments that have been influenced by those well-organized people who are afraid of losing, rather than all of our generation and future generations that have so much at stake to win.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That's Grace. Do you want to carry on? What's your vision for the future, or what should we be doing next?
I'm happy to, but I feel like I've just spoken recently. If anyone else on the panel wants to jump in, and I can.
Well, we're going to get to everyone.
Oh, we'll get to everyone. Perfect. Well, I just got to enter this contest. Grist had a hopeful fiction future. And so I got to envision the future, and it was so beautiful and fun. And one of the things that I envisioned was that we would create a care corps, so that every single person born in the US is assigned a big sibling to kind of love them and connect with them from the day they're born until they're 18. Because I think if more people felt fundamentally loved and embedded in community, so many of the knots that we're picking at in this systemic change. And I have to say, particularly men, toxic masculinity is such a curse for us all, but it's also a curse for men. I feel that really deeply. And so if we I just think people who are loved don't seek to oppress or to harm. And so I really believe, and the Hub does this, is that our work is really to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. And that any work where you're being kind and you're truly seeing someone else, to me, that's fundamental climate work. I also just think making sure that we hold up. The other thing that I love about the Hub is that it's students, but it's also, because of who's drawn to work on climate justice, it's students from a lot of marginalized communities, and they know the gaps in the status quo. The status quo doesn't serve them. And so they know how we have to change society in this 12 years. They're already there. And so if we hold them up, if we center the voices of these queer, racialized folks with disabilities, young people, we're already, and what they envision is so beautiful, because it's just respect for all. So I really would like to see more universities empowering students in that way. And very finally, I will just say that fossil fuel industries, to build off of Kathy, money, in my next chapter, my first chapter was just published, if anyone's curious about some of this research, and I can chuck the link in the chat. But what I didn't know, and I've been studying this for a long time, is how many millions the fossil fuel industry has spent destroying and defeating every single bill at the state and federal level in the US. So these are coming forward. People are proposing comprehensive climate bills at both the state and the federal level. And then they're facing $300 million in lobbying straight up from the fossil fuel industry. Like, they have to register as lobbyists. So just make sure that's, I think, reforming how corporations can participate in politics is going to be a big one in the future.
Okay, so we've got policy, love, democracy. These are all great.
In Amitav Ghosh's book, he articulates very clearly the disproportionate impact of the climate crisis on the developing world, the global south, the class dimensions of it in developed societies. And I think if one of the most practical things that we can do regarding the climate crisis is to support Indigenous land-based movements, both materially and in political support, not only in the Canadian context, but internationally, where extractivism is going on, where the deepest move to have climate emitting fuels located, articulated, and the resistance to those are happening amongst 370 million Indigenous people across the planet. But at some point, there will also need to be that confrontation with the state-made policies, and that means functioning in that mainstream political arena, in as much as the rules of the game might be stacked against this narrative and process. That part, both at the policy level and the political level, is absolutely necessary. But the movement, the political energy, has to begin from outside of that frame in order to take it over, because the existing frames and working within the existing structures has proven to be limited. But we have to keep that in sight, because that is the public way that we're going to change the kind of collective possibility that's out there.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I Yeah, I completely agree that addressing the climate crisis is an opportunity to address other societal ills, be it poverty, be it inequality, racism, colonialism. And my hope is very much that we move away from this extractivist economy to more community-based ways of producing energy and food and taking care of each other. So one of the dangers I see there, sort of if we're looking at what is proposed, there's another direction which is sort of more the techno fix, which is unfortunately what sort of many of those who finance solutions are thinking about, right? Those are the technological solutions, may not be necessarily large-scale geoengineering, but something which is essentially technologically, instead of engaging in these deeper societal transformations. And and sort of I see a danger that we may be going down that route, and but I think we have to oppose that in any way. Thanks.
Martha.
Well, this is a little bit of a tough one for me because I'm really not a climate scientist or a climate activist. But I think what Lynne's book really made a huge impact on me. Right after I read her book, I also watched a wonderful film by David Attenborough called, what is it, A Life on This Earth, which is his very personal reflection. So both of those had a huge impact on me. And I guess what I would say is that, climate change really is the problem that threatens all of us right now. It threatens our kids and future generations. So maybe the way to think about it is that we all have a different part to play. And for me, I'm not only a scientist, but I'm an educator. There's a lot of talk at Stanford right now because Stanford actually is starting a new school of sustainability. This is something that hasn't happened for many years. And so wherever this problem intersects with your life, anything that you can do, both either at a personal level or a community level, to really push the conversation, push the ways that the next generation are going to be educated differently, to look at the problems differently and look at them maybe more holistically, because it is an amazing confluence of scientific challenges, but then this meeting of how do we really enact social change? So these problems require all of us to be talking and working together. So anything that any of us can do to make that happen, I think, is what it's going to take to move the needle.
Sort of herd immunity approach. I like that. Lynne, I don't want to let you off the hook entirely here, even though you wrote this book and had lots of things to say. But do you have a vision for a post-carbon future that you wanted to share? What would that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, as you say, I wrote the book, so I don't want to take too much time because I want to hear from everybody. But so when I thought of that question as something, I had this fantasy that we would have a mosaic of responses that would give a vision of a future that we can work towards. Because I think one of the things that holds people back is, protesting pipelines isn't everybody's cup of tea. Lots of other people would be more interested in building this new future if they could imagine it, if they could see it. And so I had a little trivial thing that I was going to throw out there, but being last, it seems really silly because we just heard all these wonderful things. But I was going to say, I look forward to a return of things being special. So things being local. We've got to the point where, chocolate, coffee, bananas, anytime, anywhere, there's nothing is special anymore. Things made locally, they're the same, this homogenization of the globe is so expensive from a carbon perspective that in my post-carbon future, it's not that we never get those things, it's that they're really special again. So that was my little contribution to that vision.
I love that. That's a lovely thought. Well, we're nearly wrapping up here, but I would like to invite our panelists to offer a 3 or 4 minute reflection of whatever form they like. It could be poetry or it could be a comment. And I reflecting on our conversation today, and I thank you so much for joining us. And also maybe circling back to Lynne's book, which is why we're here as well. So I leave that rather open to you. Does anyone want to? Your speaker is your audio is on, so maybe I can invite you to kick off.
Yeah, I was just going to thank Lynne so much for putting this book into the world, the kind of labor and contemplative time that it takes to reflect and go through the process of this work. Writing is a form of therapy for oneself as well, and certainly in the books that I've worked on in terms of the exhaustions of political life, of work, of intractable political questions. And what I really pulled from it was actually underlying the grief and the melancholy that's articulated is a kind of hopeful outside that we can think anew about how do we revitalize movements, how do we intervene in a different way. And in sharing your story about being a scientist, of entering into political life, of being on those research trips, your own family story of your great-grandfather in the North, I think in each of the ways those are transmitted, it has the capacity to produce a kind of affect that makes me reflective about how I do this work as well, because ultimately this is going to be the largest collective project we can imagine. When I've interviewed a scientist, Charles David Keeling, who measured CO2 at Mauna Loa, fought so long for decades to maintain the research funding. His son runs that project. I had a chance to interview him about 10 years ago. And he talks about needing something, the scale of the Manhattan Project, the scale of something that happened after the Second World War. We see those narratives land down in a kind of what does a post-pandemic future look like? All of this social housing that was built, all the things that people fought for, pensions to unemployment insurance, the world was remade after that period. And as problematic as it is, mobilizing the state will only happen through grassroots political mobilization. And for that to happen, it needs stories like this, written by different people in different forms, that we can be inspired to think in a utopian way, because that's going to be absolutely necessary to be inspired and to sustain these movements in a way that we're not going to be falling down, but actually getting up through those stories. So thank you so much for putting this out into the world.
Thank you, Anne. Catherine, do you want to make some concluding comments?
Sure. Lynne Quarmby is one of the smartest and most accomplished and courageous people that I know. She's run for office and she was an amazing candidate. I saw her in action. She's run a lab. She's been a university administrator. She's been arrested twice, which is an extraordinary sacrifice for all of us. And now she's written a book too. And that can be kind of intimidating, but actually reading this book, it's just a very personal account that I think all of us regular folks can relate to. And it's kind of how do we live our lives knowing the magnitude of the crisis, knowing that we're not doing enough, knowing that even if we got our act together in terms of policies and individual actions today, we'd still be living with a few decades of change. And I think the way she processes that, and then the final chapter is quite beautiful, is that there is still wonder in our lives, even if it's, as Lynne says, tempered with sorrow, that there's joy in acting with others. And I'm sure many of the folks here were part of the September 2019 climate march where, 100,000 Vancouverites were in the streets. And it's a climate crisis, but everyone was smiling. And there is something joyful about being with other people who have a shared purpose. And so last night, just as I was rereading passages from Lynne's book, I get these updates of my favorite cartoonist in Australia. And he has a character called Brenda the Civil Disobedience Penguin. And today's cartoon is, how do we go on in this? And so I will quote from Brenda, we are not surrendering, just the opposite. In fact, we are getting on with it. And what are we fighting for? What we've always fought for: each other, our communities, families and friends, and complete strangers. And most importantly, flightless aquatic birds, because Brenda is a penguin after all. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Brenda. She should have been on the panel. Grace, you want to make some concluding comments?
Sure. I think something I've really been working on is, I think capitalism and this world and these structures and these systems really give us a scarcity mindset. And I know my generation, I was born into this time. I graduated from university during like the market crash, 2008, 2010. And I'm from the US. So there was always this sense, okay, well, I have to do well on this test, because if I don't do well on this test, I might fail this class. And if I fail this class, I'm not going to get a job in this job market. And it allows you to take every single thing and not take the risk. And that's true. Some people should not take the risk. But the scarcity mindset makes you feel like everything might destroy you. And what I love about Lynne's book is, as Catherine mentioned, Lynne took the risk, and Lynne took her privilege and really used it in incredibly admirable ways. And I try to remember every single day and really read the accounts of the racialized folks and the Indigenous land defenders, what they're giving up to protect the air, land, and water, truly putting their limbs, their lives, their livelihoods on the line. And so that helps me fight the scarcity mindset a little bit, because I can also, academia is a tenuous place. There's all these senses that I might not be employed. I might not do this. I maybe shouldn't take this risk. But I'm a white cis woman who has a PhD and all of these other degrees. And so whenever I show up in a space, I try to move as if I have that privilege and take the risk when I can to support the folks who are taking the ultimate risks on the front line. But it extends it further than that, this scarcity mindset that we don't have time for ourselves or our friends, that we always have to be moving and hustling. And it's the ultimate emperor's new clothes. It keeps us all so busy and tired and anxious that we are not nourishing ourselves and each other and our communities. And so, just really fighting that scarcity mindset to me. And I personally only know Lynne and Catherine on the panel, but I've seen both of you use your privilege in incredibly powerful ways in meetings, in institutional power dynamics that don't favor students, because it took a lot of work to get the climate hub. And so, it's wonderful to watch other people do that. And I'm sure lots of other on the panel have done it as well.
Thank you. Can we see your puppy?
Yes, you can. Babe.
Talking about nourishing and support. There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we thank you so much. Stephen, do you want to carry on this thread or take it somewhere else?
Sure. I'll return to Lynne's book again, too. And one thing that's so striking about the book is the worldview that comes across. And that worldview is so much in sync with a lot of the things being mentioned here about this need to cooperate and work together and support each other. And I love the fact that so much of that comes through in the science, in Lynne's explanations of biology. And I just got to throw a few quotations out there that life has radiated out from one ancient ancestor. We are all related. And cross-kingdom communication refers to, the deep interconnectedness of life on Earth. Survival has hung on various bits working together. Cooperation is integral to our continuance. There's this wonderful worldview that's everywhere in this book that's embodied in the fact that the book brings together poetry and science and activism and sort of personal life narrative. All these different things come together around one singular project. And the fact that Lynne can locate that in her an understanding of the world based in evolution. It's just a gorgeous thing. So I thought I would just contribute one extremely short poem that also is about pulling together. These magnets, why are they so heavy? Thought of planets itself is anti-gravity. Snow geese crossing and recrossing the sky. Lantern sound of their calling, all the color drained from the fruit as we swell under moonlight beneath equinox and the eaves. Diane de Prima says, quote, "No one way works. It will take all of us shoving at the thing from all sides to bring it down," end quote. Thanks. And thanks, Lynne.
Thanks, Stephen. That's wonderful. Yes. And that long, the classic, the huge longue durée of evolutionary life is and nature and what we can learn from that as well. And thank you for the poetry. Kirsten, last but not least on our panel, did you want to make some concluding comments?
Yeah, sure. After this wonderful contribution by Stephen, it's hard to maintain this the same level. Perhaps something some threads I'd like to pick up on is again related to the science and the book. So to me, so usually when I read books about climate change and the climate crisis, this sort of I know about the science, so that's nothing new to me. But what I really enjoyed in this book that it gave me these very interesting and fascinating forays into science, into cell and evolutionary biology. So and supporting the world view that is articulated in the book, as Stephen just mentioned. Something else I wanted to say, what sort of part of the book that spurred a lot of reflection was the one when Lynne gives the science talk to the crew on the ship, and so this is something I do quite a bit in front of public audiences, and I think what it really spurred me to think about is that the emotional reaction that these type of information can actually can give an individual. So what it means to confront the audience and individuals with the data, with the science, and with my teaching, because I teach courses about climate science where we present the data, and I think I've given very little space to actually these emotional reactions to the data. So I think this is definitely something that we as scientists need to give more room to, and reflect on how to better achieve giving more room to. And finally, what I wanted to say is that from the point of the science, it is very clear that on the current trajectory, we're headed towards catastrophe, that we have very little time to limit warming to a level that avoids the most dangerous consequences, and that we need to get to a carbon-free economy as soon as we can. And this is a monumental task that requires engagement from all sectors of societies, all societal groups and generations. And I really would like to thank grace, because it really gives me hope just to see sort of the optimism and also sort of the toolkit that youth have available right now, and sort of the thinking that is going on. So that really, so that actually gives me hope that we might be able to pull this together. And also, as was mentioned, the important role of art and storytelling and all of this. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I want to go to Martha, but I'm just reminded of my bad joke about, the poet and the climate scientist and the biologist going into the bar. I think all those people need to go into the bar, plus a whole bunch of other people, if we're to, and then we can, have some interesting conversations. Martha.
Yes. Gosh, it's really hard again to make some concluding comments because everyone has touched on so many special aspects of the book and of Lynne. Maybe I'll just bring it back to something, maybe pulling together some themes. So people have talked a lot about how we need optimism to be able to act and enact change. And I think reading this book, really at the heart of it, it just gave me that optimism and really that inspiration. And I want to close by really, I think, being kind of personal in my thanks to Lynne. Anyone who reads this book is now going to appreciate all the amazing things that Lynne has done in her life. And I think what it really boils down to is, she's the bravest person I know, and she really has the bravery to be herself and to just put all of herself into things. And I wanted to say a word on impact. So also from the book, Lynne, you really very clearly portray, your frustration, I'd say even agony, over some of the huge ambitions you had and feeling like you have fallen short on some of those goals. I actually think it's hugely important to realize that we all make a lot of impact on individual people and on that level, and to have the optimism that our personal relationships and our ability to support other people then enables those people to support more people. And I do believe in that. And one small element of the many-layered book, Lynne talks a lot about what it's like to be a female scientist. She tells some horrible stories, which we all have. I just like to close in explaining a little bit how I know Lynne. Mm-hmm. So I met her at scientific conferences. We've never lived in the same town. We've never lived at the same university. And yet over, like 20 years now, we've maintained a friendship. Whenever we do see each other, we click into place. And being a female in science, that you're sort of always experiencing death by 1,000 paper cuts, what people now call microaggressions. And really the only answer to that is to surround yourself with people that are positive, that will support you and reaffirm that you're doing, everything you can do. And that is Lynne. So maybe my concluding wish for the world is that really everyone could not only read this book, but that everyone would have Lynne Quarmby or someone like Lynne Quarmby in their hype crew. And maybe the ultimate challenge in this book is to really become that kind of person and that kind of inspirational leader for other people in our lives as well. So thank you, Lynne. I wish we were here and could have a real hug.
Thank you, Martha. It's a lovely point, and it loops back to Grace's point about I guess love, about having people that love you and people that support you, and the importance of love, if we can call it that. So thank you all to our wonderful panel. We've just got maybe five 5 minutes or so left. So Lynne, I want to give you the space for a final reflection for a few minutes. Yes. So, what is yours?
I will do my best to hold it together. This has been really touching today, and so many great things said. And I feel that this panel has it. It's a dream, it's like the panel and the discussion, you all have exemplified what we need to be doing. I'm not going to be able to express it. I'm a bit too emotional, but it's really been an amazing experience. And I wish I had started doing this earlier, but towards the end, I started jotting down a few things that really key things that I know that Martha and Am and Kirsten had all said this, and others in different ways, that it's really about all of us doing whatever it is how this intersects with our lives. That we don't all need to be activists and do silly things like run for political office, but we do what we're doing in ways, as Grace said, taking care of each other is an act of climate justice. There's just so many different ways that this can manifest. So thank you all for exemplifying that and bringing it to life today for this panel. Nick, I'm deeply indebted and just so deeply honored for all of you for showing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynne. Thank you for that. That's just a lovely way to conclude and to wrap up. If you haven't read Lynne's book, you should. I hope you've got that message loud and clear. Available in all good bookshops, or you can find friends who have copies, and go to the library and buy, pick up a copy for free there as well.
And thank you to everyone who took time out on this beautiful day to join us for this panel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, indeed. Thank you to our panelists for spending time with us, and for Lynne for writing this lovely book, and thank you all to you who've joined us in this conversation. I'm afraid we couldn't answer all the questions. I had questions that I was supposed to have addressed that I didn't cover as well. So we were shortchanged. But read the book and I'm sure you can continue the conversation in ways that work for you. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are, and that you stay healthy and you stay well. And thank you all.